The building of walls by mud, or mud brick, has been going on since 10,000 BC. It's still going on. And maybe I'll reveal something to you that you may know, that most of the people on Earth today live in mud brick houses. 60%. And if you travel not too far south, you go into Mexico, along certain roads, you'll see all the houses are built of mud brick. They call it adobe in Spanish. And they will plaster it or whitewash it. And if you whitewash it, it becomes fairly waterproof, and so it could last for 15 or 20 years. Without the waterproofing, it'll last for 10 years or so. But not only were houses built of mud brick, but city walls were built of mud brick, many of them. So you have then now the creation of real brick, namely baked clay. Then they discovered something else, that certain stones near the fire began to hemorrhage shiny liquid stuff, metals. And so copper was discovered. And then tin was discovered. And they're very pretty. When you melt copper out of a stone, it's very pretty. But then it changes color. And if you try to make a hammer out of copper, and you try to hit something with it, the copper will be damaged and not the thing you hit, because copper is very soft. And if you've ever seen pure tin has the strength and consistency of cream cheese. So not very useful as a tool. And then again, by chance or accident, they melted copper and tin together, and bronze resulted. Now you have a hard metal. The Bronze Age begins around 3500 BC. And it begins at a very interesting time. The Bronze Age, we call it early bronze because the Bronze Age lasts a long time. The Bronze Age lasts from 3500 to 1200 BC. And it's divided by historians into three stages. We have early bronze, middle bronze, late bronze, and then the Iron Age, which appears around 1200 BC. Because iron is an entirely different product, and the technology of making iron is much more difficult than that of making bronze. So it took a long time, and only one particular civilization discovered the iron problem, solved the iron problem, and used iron for about 200 years before anybody else could get their hands on it. They really kept that secret. It's very interesting. And they discovered iron about 1400 BC, but we don't call it the Iron Age until 1200, because that's when everybody began to get their hands on it and also learned how to do it. Now, the Bronze Age coincides with something else that happened, and that's the invention of writing. Writing was invented first by the Sumerians. They're the earliest writing is Sumerian. And by Professor Kramer, Samuel Noah Kramer, who's one of the great authorities on Sumerian civilization, he has written several books on Sumerian civilization. One very interesting little book he wrote is called History Begins at Sumer, because essentially that's where it starts. They invented writing. Now, you could say, why did they invent writing? How did it come about? Well, there are several factors. What we do know is by 3500 BC in Sumer, there was a very highly developed civilization, a very sophisticated civilization. A lot of arts and crafts, highly developed, and there was a lot of business going on, and also they already had a legal system and the definition of private property. And that's very interesting. Private property, and that required the drawing of boundaries and the drawing up of bills of purchase and sale and the definition of lots of boundaries that you were buying, let's say. And this was something that, in a sense, demanded a system of notation. And we can actually see in the earliest tablets how they are making symbols on clay tablets. Now, why did they use clay? Because clay was ubiquitous. It was the most common material around. It was all over the place, and it was very convenient. You take a piece of clay, you put it in your hand, and it's hand-sized, and you smooth it over, and then you make a symbol on it. And the symbol could be simply a drawing of a house, or a drawing of a sheep, or a jar which represents oil, or a jar which represents wine. In other words, you make simple symbols. But the interesting thing is that it was the language of the Sumerians which gave the clue to what we call writing. And that's because, you know, writing could have been invented by anyone. It would have been more difficult by people who speak Babylonian or Hebrew or English. But in the case of Sumer, there was something about the language which immediately led to the association of the picture with the sound without the picture. In other words, once you get that disassociation of the sound from the picture, you have the beginning of the idea of writing. And why in the Sumerian language? Well, the Sumerian language is a language that has a structure we call agglutinative. There are several languages that have that feature. One is Turkish, Hungarian, Finnish, Mongolian, and probably Japanese. I'm not certain about that, but we are certain of Mongolian, Sumerian, and Turkish. Now, what is there about this agglutinative quality? We speak a language which we call it inflective. That is, certain words are changed by changing of pronunciation, addition of inner vowels, and addition of suffixes, and so on. In these languages, like Sumerian, one syllable gives the meaning already. But that syllable can have several meanings, depending on how it's spoken, or in Chinese, how the tone. If you say something, the rising tone, it means one thing. You say same, let's say the word ma. Ma means one thing, ma means something else. Ma is a different meaning. In other words, there's something about the pronunciation which changes the meaning, but also provides this. If I draw a picture of a sheep, and the sheep is pronounced, the word is pronounced lu, but then I don't look at the picture, or I simply pronounce it, and I say lu with a different tone, it means a man. This already gives me the opportunity to take the picture of the sheep, put it together with something else, and say, I don't mean sheep, I mean big man. In other words, certain elements are stuck together. That's why we call it an agglutinative language. And by sticking the elements together, you change the meaning. But also the fact that each element, each syllable has a meaning inherent in it, gives the opportunity to dissociate the picture from the sound. And thus they were able to realize that if they drew a picture and it meant one thing, and then they simply pronounced it without looking at the picture, it could mean something else. And gradually, probably rapidly, writing emerged. Writing meaning symbolic representation of human speech, without necessarily relating it to a scene or a picture. Now, you can do it in English by playing games with it, like saying, using a picture of a bee and a picture of a leaf, and then putting them together and saying belief, and then it means something entirely different. Belief, faith, you know. So we know, for example, that Lu pronounced one way means man. Lugal means big man, and Lugal then means the word for king. So you see, each thing adds something to it and creates a new concept.